Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Law and Crime Trial Network. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. This afternoon, we are covering the extradition hearing for Bryan Kohberger that is going to take place in the Monroe County Courthouse in Pennsylvania at around 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. Now, I do have to tell you that there are no cameras allowed in that courtroom, but what we are going to try to do is show you what is happening outside of the courthouse. And of course, we'll report back to you the latest information as we get it. Now, the 28-year-old grad student from Washington State University was arrested and named a suspect in the University of Idaho student murders case last Friday. As you know, 4 students are believed to have been stabbed to death in the early morning hours of November 13th, likely asleep at the time. Law and Crime has been on top of this case from the very beginning, with correspondent Sierra Gillespie at the hearing now and reporter Anjanette Levy also live in Idaho. Now, before I introduce my panel and get into some of our viewer questions, again, we would love for you to submit questions to us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We'll try our best to answer them here on
University of Idaho murderer will appear in front of a judge and the world today in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. Suspect 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger will appear this afternoon for an extradition hearing. As Law and Crime Network reported, Kohberger was arrested in the early morning hours of Friday at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. That's not far from where we are here in Monroe County, but more recently, Kohberger was a PhD candidate at Washington State University. His apartment there in Washington State is not a far drive from the University of Idaho or the off-campus home where 4 students were found brutally stabbed to death back in November. For weeks, we had little information about that case. No leads, no suspects, and really no information except that investigators were searching for a white Hyundai Elantra. We can now confirm that a white Elantra was seized during the investigation at Kohberger's parents' house. Speaking of Kohberger's parents, we're also learning that Kohberger's father recently flew from Pennsylvania over to Washington to drive with his son cross-country back here to the East Coast. During that more than 2,000-mile road trip, Kohberger's father said he didn't notice anything suspicious or off about his son. Kohberger's family, though, has since released a statement saying they send their remorse to the family members of the victims and that they're hoping this can play out in the legal system. As for Kohberger's public defender, he says his client hopes to soon be exonerated and that he is not fighting extradition. He also reminds the public that Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty and that this should not be tried in the court of public opinion. So what can we expect from this extradition hearing this afternoon? Kohberger will appear in front of a judge at about 3:30, and the hearing isn't expected to be very long. He isn't fighting the extradition, meaning he could be back in Idaho as early as this evening. After that, Kohberger will appear in front of a Latah County judge, and it's then that a now sealed affidavit will likely be unsealed. Then we will likely learn more information about the investigation and what led up to Kohberger's arrest. For now, though, we will continue to follow this ever-developing case, bringing you the latest details as they unfold. Reporting in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Sierra Gillespie, Law and Crime Network.
All right, great reporting there by Sierra. I'm joined right now this hour by Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy, who is outside the Latah County Courthouse. I'm also joined by retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who's been following this case from the beginning, and criminologist Dr. Debbie Goodman. It's great to have you all here. I'd like to get right into the viewer questions from social media, YouTube, because there really people have an interest in this case. Anjanette, I'm going to start with you. This is from Sway from YouTube. I'm actually going to read you Sway's question and then hit you with a question of my own. So the first question from Sway is, when is the trial likely to take place? I'll tell you, probably not for quite some time. The question I will pose to you is, will there be cameras allowed in Idaho for these proceedings as they progress?
Well, Jesse, I think that it would be a very, very long time. I mean, we haven't even seen Bryan Kohberger served with the complaint in this case. That won't happen until he arrives back in Idaho. So we are a long, long way away from a trial if this case even gets that far. And it appears it may, because he is maintaining his innocence at this point in time. So it could take years, actually. Think about the amount of discovery, the evidence that would have to be turned over in this case. It would be voluminous, with 300 police interviews, reams of video footage that were turned over to police, crime lab results, crime scene photos, all kinds of things that would need to be turned over. And I was saying earlier, I think it would be terabytes of evidence and information that would be turned over. We're here at the courthouse in Latah County, Jesse, and this is where Bryan Kohberger would make his initial appearance. And the jail is here as well. So we're a long way away from a trial, of course. But it's going to take a long time, I think, for this case to make its way through the courts. And I forgot your second question, Jesse, if you could just hit me
it
with
was
that
about
again.
if there's going to be cameras allowed. Are we going to see anything as this progresses in Idaho?
Oh, right. Well, we certainly hope so, at least for the initial appearance. And cameras are allowed in the courtrooms in Idaho, but there is some wording in the statute that allows for the judge, if he or she sees fit, to bar cameras from the courtroom. We saw that happen in the Daybell case in another part of Idaho. We're hoping that doesn't happen in this case. This is a case that has tremendous public interest, not only here in the United States, but overseas as well. So we certainly hope that cameras will be allowed in the courtroom throughout this case.
Jennifer, let me go to you. I'm going to preface this question that we have from Atharia from YouTube in the sense that there's so much we don't officially know, right? There's been reports about how he was apprehended, the use of DNA, the use of genealogical websites like we've seen in the Jerry Burns case and the Golden State Killer. So let me just preface that with we still don't have confirmation on how he was positively identified. But having said that, the question we have from Atharia from YouTube is, how could the defense team challenge the genealogy connection in this case?
Well, they could challenge it if, as an example, he was actually there at that location for a party or was in there for some other reason. So they could possibly say that, listen, of course his DNA was there. He was there on another occasion. And I think that is the biggest concern that personally I have as this case plays out.
So Dr. Debbie Goodman, I go to you now. Again, this is pure speculation at this point, but people have a lot of questions. Let's say, again, we don't know the evidence against him, but this is from Goofy Girl from YouTube, which I will say, not a goofy question. The question from Goofy Girl is, any chance he'll plead guilty? This is the part that I find interesting. Do these types ever do that? So assuming he actually did do that, have your experience with someone in this case plead guilty to this?
Yes, thank you, Jesse, for that question and from the viewer who submitted it. So I feel strongly that he will not plead guilty. Why? Because even a most recent statement that he made to his public defender and the statement from this suspect is that, oh, I am certain I will be exonerated. Well, to say that type of verbiage for me as a criminologist is very different than saying I'm certain that I'm innocent, I didn't do this crime. So because of his knowledge, even as a PhD student, these become very intense, immersive types of academic programs. So I believe, knowing now of his intellect and his background, he has something in his back pocket that potentially he thinks, through his reading, through his research, all of the planning and premeditation and decision making that had to go into this atrocity, I do not see him pleading guilty.
Yeah, I mean, the question of why has come up so much, speculating about his background and what may have led him do this, the connection between him and the victims. We have a question, Anjanette, from Be a Shiner, Not a Whiner from YouTube. I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people out there. When will law enforcement release the 911 call? Now, of course, this is the 911 call from one of the surviving roommates. And of course, the garbage truck right in the background as Anjanette is, I'm asking this question.
Right.
So in case you couldn't hear me, the question is, when will law enforcement release the 911 call?
Well, we're not sure, but we do know for sure that it is trash day here in Moscow, Idaho, but we really don't know. When I had spoken to Aaron Snell a couple of weeks ago, last month actually, when we were here in Idaho, he felt that it could be released sooner rather than later. He didn't have a date or a timeline for that. But, I spoke to him the week of December 5th when I did a pretty extensive interview with him, and he thought it could be possibly released at some point. So it hasn't been released right now. We're hoping maybe after this complaint is unsealed, it will be. But you have to think maybe there were details on that call from the roommates and the other person on the call that maybe showed they were details that maybe only the killer would know. And that is the only reason I could think that that call hadn't been released at this time. We know how close to the vest Moscow police have been holding everything. They've played this they've played it the way it should be played. There haven't really been any leaks. When we've heard about leaks, I think it's come from other sources. So as far as this investigation goes here in Moscow, we're hoping that 911 call will be released at some point. We just don't have a time when, but I will ask about that again.
And we wonder, how much will the probable cause affidavit ultimately show about the arrest? It's going to have a lot of details, but maybe not all the details that people are asking for. And Jennifer, we have a question from Laura Wright on YouTube. Do we know if parts of the probable cause affidavit will be redacted? And I'll ask you, if that's the case, what do you think would be redacted?
It's possible. Anytime there are witness statements, they often redact any names. So I would expect and anticipate any names of witnesses that could be involved in that affidavit to be redacted.
All right, I'll tell you what, we're going to take more of your questions. We're eagerly anticipating the extradition hearing, although unfortunately, as I said, there will be no cameras allowed in that hearing, but we will report back to you the latest information as we get it. And of course, we are going to take more of your questions. Let's take a quick break. And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We're still following the University of Idaho murder case. 28-year-old Brian Koberger has his extradition hearing today in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. He was arrested Friday in connection to the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 college students who were found dead in November of last year. And we're taking your viewer questions right now from social media and YouTube. A lot of people have questions about what's going to happen next in this process, and we do want to hear from you. But first up, before we get to more questions, I do want to play a portion of something that you might not have seen. This is from the attorney for victim Kaylee Gonsalves' family. Let's hear what he had to say.
I think everybody was relieved. The family was relieved, and it's long from over. The next, that chapter's kind of closed at least, and then now the next chapter starts. The whole criminal justice process, and so I think everyone had a little bit of relief and was able maybe to sleep at night, and then now it's back to the grind again. So we had no idea. They hadn't released any information, had no heads up about anything. I think I received a call it was about 10:30, I think, on Thursday night, and from the Moscow Police Department letting me know that they were in the process of taking someone into custody. They didn't release the name or any of that information to us that night. I immediately called the family and spoke with them. They were obviously, happy and relieved to a certain degree. And then I got more information, more details about who the defendant was in the case the next morning.
All right, I'm back here with my A-list panel. Dr. Debbie Goodman, our criminologist on the panel. I'm going to go to more viewer questions. Before we do, I just want to ask a question of my own to you. The minute it came out that he's this graduate student for criminology and criminal justice, and he's attending Washington State University, I don't know what people were first thinking of, whether or not this is somebody, again, pure speculation, but whether or not he had this fascination in crime. What was his connection to what seemingly could have been complete strangers? He apparently was taught by by Catherine Ramsland at one point. What is your theories? Or let me put it this way. What are you hoping to learn from him? Or what are you hoping to learn about this case, about if he's the one who did this, potential motives?
Sure. So I can tell you, Jesse, and our viewers, I've had the pleasure and privilege of serving as a professor in the state of Florida at 3 universities for 27 years. And the individuals with whom I have interacted, my students have gone on to contribute in such great manner. And at whatever point I may have met them, interacted with them, taught them, whether it's a 2-year program in academics and crime, law, and justice, or the 4-year programs, the master's degrees, and certainly at the doctoral level, that these are men and women who are so devoted, dedicated, conscientious in our field, and make extraordinary contributions at local police departments, at state agencies, federal, FBI, DEA, Customs Marshal, Secret Service, Homeland Security. So when I initially heard about who this individual is and the level of intellect, I actually think that because of his background, his research, his knowledge, that will be an important aspect for the prosecution to show that there would be limited mitigating conditions, to show that it was with planning, premeditation, it was willful, it was with malice. He would know all of this. And it will be extraordinary when the investigators, even as we speak, start to take a look at what primarily was he researching and why. So I have no doubt that this level of knowledge that he would have acquired up to this point meant that he knew exactly what he was doing. You know, we call it mens rea actus reus, criminal mind and then criminal action. For me, both sides of the coin have been checked off thus far.
So, Anjanette, let me go to you right now. We have questions about the blood that was found at the crime scene. This is from Carla Dunham from YouTube. You know how there was blood outside the window? I often wonder if that was his blood somehow. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of people believe that what we saw on the wall outside of the home was blood. We weren't able to really get confirmation on that. I was told by somebody it could be rust, but it certainly looked like blood. I don't know what that was or if it was his blood or belonging to someone else. But it was interesting to me that it was still there for quite some time on that concrete wall. Kind of shocking to see something like that. So we really just don't know if it was his or not. We do know, and we should, I couch all of this with the fact that he is maintaining his innocence at this point in time. And, there hasn't been a trial yet. He hasn't even appeared here in Idaho for this case. So we need to keep that in mind. But I don't think that, say, somebody was leaving a home, that blood would be left in that pattern. And even though I'm not a blood spatter expert, I don't think it would be left like that because it looked like something that had kind of dripped down from the home, possibly under the siding. Just my thought.
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So in our system, you are innocent until proven guilty. And I think it's important to remember that because, Jennifer, two of our questions are almost related. We have Chris Dahl from YouTube. What if he really is innocent? Well, he is innocent until proven guilty, as I said. So the question is, what if he's really innocent? But I'm also going to throw this to you, Jennifer. This is from McNamara Dawn F from YouTube. What are the chances that the suspect isn't guilty if he was found not guilty after being convicted in the press? How does he come back from that?
Well, this individual would have a very difficult time coming back from that because no matter what, a great majority of this nation would probably believe that he indeed committed these crimes. He has certainly been, charged. And so we know in a court of law, they have found probable cause to believe he is guilty. Now, that doesn't rise to the standard necessary for conviction, obviously, but I think it would leave many believing, no matter whether he's exonerated or not, that he would have been somehow involved in this.
Yeah, and people are fascinated about the legal process that's going to progress now and what the evidence will be. We go to a question here from Tracy from YouTube. Dr. Goodman, I'll throw this to you. If DNA evidence is found in Brian's car, that Kia Elantra that everybody was talking about, that they were searching for, if it was found in Brian's car, but he had his car serviced before his road trip or after the road trip, could that potentially pose problems for the prosecution?
It's a good question, but I think if there is blood in there, it is pointing with a red blinking, light toward him, the suspect. These are the possibilities, but as a criminologist, I like to go with probability and data analytics. DNA is our best friend, as we like to say in the field of crime, law, and justice. And the probabilities are so huge and enormous that when there is a connectivity between the individual suspect and our victims, that alone is very, huge evidence.
And Jeanette, again, I said people are fascinated with the legal process. We have a question from Mikalvano S. from Twitter. What is a rough timeline of how the court process will happen? Are we looking at years or months? And I'll just add this, I don't think Anjanette is going to be down there for years or months, but she is going to probably be covering this the best that she possibly can. What are we looking at in terms of a timeline?
I think the entire process from, initial appearance to indictment to, carrying this through to a possible trial, through a trial, it could take years. There's a lot of evidence in this case. We don't yet know exactly who is going to represent Brian Kohberger, other than it will be a public defender. There are 4 people in Latah County who are contracted to handle public defender work. They don't have a statewide state public defender system here in Idaho. And 2 of those people can't represent him. One being the coroner, Kathy Mabbitt. She's conflicted out, as is another lawyer who's under contract in her office. So that leaves 2 other lawyers here in Latah County, and I've looked them up, and they do not appear, the other 2 lawyers, the 2 women, do not appear to be death certified or qualified, at least, to handle a death penalty case, according to what I've seen on the web. So there are just a certain number of people, I guess, here in Idaho, a certain number of attorneys who are, death certified or death qualified. That means that they have whatever certifications or credentials they need to handle a death penalty case. So it could take a long time, and I think he's obviously going to have more than one lawyer. He will hopefully have a team to represent his interests.
It's interesting you talk about Kathy Mabbitt, because this is somebody who, when you interviewed Shannon Gray a couple weeks ago, he was awfully critical of the idea of the coroner making statements about the autopsy results, and this is somebody else who's conflicted, who also has this job as an attorney as well. So it was interesting to hear him talk about that. Jennifer, I want to pose a question to you about communication in this case. One of the things that I found so interesting before the arrest of Kohberger was the statements from law enforcement, a day, 2 days before this happened, saying, look, we have no publicly identifiable suspect. We're still asking for information from the public. And I'll never forget what Chief Fry said in an interview. He said, look, we don't want to release the 911 phone call. We don't want to provide more information because we do not want to taint a future prosecution. We want to get the green light from the prosecutor's office. And that kind of rang in my head. That's a standard answer, but also he could have said, we don't want to say anything, we don't want to release anything to taint the investigation. It makes me wonder how early on they knew about Kohberger.
No, I agree. I think it was earlier in that week. There was a point that there was a complete change in demeanor, a confidence that exuded from the chief. There was that comment that you just talked about where he referred to the prosecutor can handle that. That was a flag. I thought another flag was the clearing of the crime scene where they wanted to have that cleaned and so forth. I thought that was sort of strange timing. But I equated it to their statements that they didn't have any sort of suspect in mind. So there were definitely some indications. I totally agree with you on that. And I think they learned in and around the early part of that week.
So we have another interesting question here, Dr. Goodman, from Naz Nadoz from YouTube. Does anyone think he's going to represent himself? Clearly, a lot of people think that knew him said he's actually believed he is the smartest person in the room. You've talked about his intelligence. Obviously, we don't know any indication that he would do that. But if you follow this line of speculation right now, and people believe, well, he's a criminology student, maybe he thought he could get away with it. Again, is this somebody in your experience, high-profile crime, multiple murders, they might decide to represent themselves?
Right. Great question and a very intriguing conversation, that alone. So I believe that this suspect is indeed with grandiosity. He thinks he's the smartest person in the room, narcissistic, and I will also say hedonistic. When we look at these killers, Jesse, whether it's the mass murderer, mass shooter, serial murderer, school-based related, workplace related, these individuals, many of whom will derive pleasure, hence the hedonism from beginning, middle, until the end of the atrocity. So I have no doubt that he would have derived, pleasure in calculating this, in carrying it out, and now the entire world knows who he is. However, to the direct question, I do not believe he will represent himself. I think he will be very forthcoming, very talkative, very involved in his own defense, but I don't see him at this moment in time representing himself.
All right. Well, we're going to take more of your questions. And again, I encourage everyone, if you have questions, you have theories, comments you want to make, submit them to us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. We'll do our best to read them here on the air. And again, we are waiting for more updates on this extradition hearing. Again, it's a hearing to determine, and we believe that he has waived his extradition, for him to physically be moved, transported from Pennsylvania to Idaho, where he awaits those charges. Welcome back, everybody. We're still following the University of Idaho murder case. Specifically, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger has his extradition hearing starting in any minute in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. No cameras allowed, but our own Sierra Gillespie is on the ground there. She can report back to us as soon as she can on updates about what is happening. Now, again, Kohberger was arrested on Friday in connection to the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 college students who were found dead in November of last year. We're taking viewer questions right now from social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. But before we get into more of your questions, let's hear again from the attorney for victim Kaylee Gonsalves' family, Shannon Gray.
I mean, they don't need to. I mean, they haven't reached out to us to set up a meeting or anything. You know, I'm obviously a criminal defense attorney myself, and a former prosecutor. So I've explained to them how the process goes, and what the hearings might entail, and how that's going to be playing out, and how we'll just kind of take it day by day. You know, everyone thinks that I think that he's going to get back here and he's going to automatically be arraigned on the case, and that's just not what's going to happen. His first appearance will probably be getting an attorney. So get either a court-appointed attorney, or if someone, you know, if the family hires an attorney, a privately retained attorney, and then that attorney's going to want a couple days to talk with his client, and then they'll have the preliminary hearing regarding the probable cause for the arrest, and then obviously the Latah County will have to get a grand jury. That's for the indictment, and he can be arraigned on an information prior to the indictment and be held on that. And then, so I mean, there's a lot of moving process things that are going on that aren't going to happen immediately on the case. So
let me bring back in our A-Star panel that we have with us. I'm also joined again by Anjanette Levy, who's outside the Latah County Courthouse. Now, Anjanette, you conducted that interview with Shannon Gray. What else did he have to say about the family and the update with this arrest of Bryan Kohberger?
Well, the family is relieved. Shannon Gray said it was around 10:30 last Thursday night when he received the call from the Moscow Police Department telling him that they were in the process of taking somebody into custody. He, of course, relayed that information immediately to Steve and Christy Gonsalves. They're relieved, but it doesn't change the fact that they've lost their daughter, that they are going to be mourning her and grieving the loss of their daughter, Kaylee, and of Maddie, of course, who was her very good friend, like a sister to her, for years to come, for the rest of their lives. You know, losing a child, they say, is it's the hardest thing that can happen to you in life. So they're grieving, but they're looking forward to this process. It's literally like a new chapter in a book, or a new volume in a book that will start unfolding. They're going to have to learn how to navigate this court process, come here to the Latah County Courthouse and, attend these hearings. And they have other children, Kaylee was one of several children. So they still have younger children who are younger than Kaylee that they're raising and caring for. So the family is just doing the best that they can at this point in time. He also said they really had no heads up about this. They weren't being given any information. I think some of us, Jennifer in the last block had mentioned, some red flags. I think a lot of us were kind of seeing those red flags, and we were hearing something might be coming, and we were seeing that Chief Fry looked optimistic in those videos, even though they weren't saying anything, and we kind of had a feeling. But the family apparently had no idea that this was coming.
It's unimaginable to think about their position, although this is a glimmer of good news for them that they might have an answer moving forward. Jennifer Coffindaffer, want to go to you. We have 2 questions that are kind of related. I think they're really fascinating. We believe that the defendant is going to waive extradition, and this might be a relatively short hearing. So the question we have from Ghetto Intellect from YouTube: Why waive extradition? Legal fees? And also from Yasmin M from YouTube, do you believe not fighting extradition could be strategic? Time is valuable for him to build his case, considering he does not have access to a public defender in Idaho.
Well, I think he waived extradition for two reasons. First of all, it's really a formality. It's nothing more than an identity hearing. And secondarily, I think it makes him look in the posture of cooperating, of I'm innocent. I'm, getting down the road with this case. And I think that that's the picture that he wants to paint to the public. A sign of his innocence. So for those two reasons, it was sort of a no-brainer, if you will, to waive this hearing.
Now, again, something I have to mention at all times is he is innocent until proven guilty. As much as the public wants to, go after and hang him, we do have a system here, and it's important to remember what that system is. We've talked about it earlier, that as frustrating as it can be for the families involved and as frustrating for a lot of people online, everybody's entitled to their rights, and so there is a way that the system is going to work. I just preface that because Dr. Goodman, one of the questions that we have from Junior Dixels from YouTube, this guy trying to claim insanity. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the question and I like the topic. I'll just briefly remind the viewers who are already adept at what this is about, but for somebody to be legally sane, two things have to happen.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Goodman, I should mention this too. Yes. My understanding is in Idaho, there is no insanity defense, but let's just assume otherwise. Keeping that in mind when we think about insanity, I'll allow you to take it from there.
Sure, thank you. But again, just for that basic knowledge and understanding moving forward, it does relate to two things, that the individual didn't know what he was doing and the individual didn't know what he was doing is wrong. So if this suspect does turn out to be guilty of this atrocity, then I would also refer back to the knowledge that he has already, acquired and doing his own, I'm sure, deep dive potentially into what this is all about. I feel that he did know what he was doing. He knew what he was doing is wrong if and when he will be found guilty.
Jennifer, Katrina Campbell from YouTube asks, can they hook him up to a lie detector machine to find out where the knife is? Because the murder weapon hasn't been recovered.
So no, he can't be forced to take a polygraph test. And the polygraph tests have been found to be unreliable, and they're not accepted in a court of law as evidentiary. So neither can he be forced to. But this is interesting. It's possible that his team, whoever his defense team ends up being, could conduct a polygraph test and could submit those results, especially if they are in his favor, to the prosecution as a move toward exculpatory or showing some exculpatory evidence. So I've seen that done before, and it can be done that way.
And by the way, a lack of a murder weapon doesn't mean you can't prosecute somebody, but it is an impediment at times to a successful prosecution. If you want to go after somebody, you want all the evidence you can possibly have. Having the murder weapon would have helped so much. Now, it is still early in this case. Something could be discovered, but again, not finding it directly is obviously an issue of concern. We want to go to a question here to you, Anjanette, from Nicole Grunwald from YouTube. Will the affidavit, the probable cause affidavit, the arrest, be made available to the public tonight?
Not tonight. I would say more than likely not, unless Bryan Kohberger somehow gets here before midnight and is served with the paperwork, and even then we would likely not get it then. But Bill Thompson, the I shouldn't say district attorney, that's not his title, prosecutor here in Latah County, said during the press conference announcing the arrest that under Idaho state law, Bryan Kohberger has to be